Hello and welcome to today's webinar, Planning for Change, How to Map and Model Your Enterprise Processes. I'm Teresa Resick, Director of Webinars here at AIIM, and AIIM is your host and producer of today's event. And with me today are Industry Analyst Mark McGregor, and from Signavio we have Chief Evangelist Tom Debevoise. Signavio is the underwriter of today's webinar, and we thank them for their support. And thank you for taking the time to join us today. And before we get started, I just want to offer a few pointers for viewing today's webinar. By joining our webinars live, you can customize your own viewing experience, so feel free to open, close, or resize the different windows. And then across the bottom of the screen is a list of all the widgets that we have available for you today. Group chat is one of those things that is available to you. So you open this by clicking the widget in the icons in that list on the bottom. And with group chat, you will be able to talk with each other, but also be aware that everyone will be able to see everything posted in here. And then Sean and I from AIIM are also going to be joining the group chat today, so feel free to join in. Do feel free to ask questions of the speakers throughout the hour using that Q&A feature, and that's to the left side of the slide area. And we will hold these questions until the end, where we should have about 5 or 10 minutes to answer them. You can also use this feature to ask for technical assistance. You can download a PDF of the presentation at any time. Just look to the resources list. That's to the right of the slide area. There's also a few other documents and links in there to help you learn more about today's topic. Just click in here at any time, and the resources will open in a new browser tab for you, and you can just save that and read them later after the webinar. And at the end of this webinar, a brief survey will open in your browser, and I'd greatly appreciate it if you take a few moments to offer your feedback and to suggest other topics for us to cover. And this webinar is being recorded, and it will be posted to AIM.org's Resources Webinars page in just a few days. And right now I want to introduce our speakers that we have with us today. And as I mentioned, we have a leading industry analyst, Mark McGregor, with us. And Mark has an extensive background in enterprise architecture, business process management, and change management. He's held executive positions with a number of technology companies, and he's also a former research director at leading IT industry analyst firm Gartner. Mark has authored a number of books on business and process management, and he has spent much of the last 10 years learning, teaching, and researching the people and cultural aspects of change and how executives perceive business and process improvement. Mark holds qualifications or certifications in Six Sigma, Prince 2, sales, neuro-linguistic programming, and hypnosis. He believes that it is the difference that makes the difference. Then we also have with us Tom Debevoise, and he is a BPM evangelist for Signavio. He is a master solution designer, architect, and systems integrator. Tom has process, decision, and event modeling expertise in many areas, including recent work in compliance, especially with the Dodd-Frank, BPM for GRC, and that's governance risk compliance, and next generation processes, and more. He is the author of several books, including The Successful Business Process Management with a Business Rules Approach. So right now, I'm going to turn things over to Mark McGregor to begin his talk today. Mark?
Thanks, Teresa, and welcome everybody. Thank you all for joining us, and thank you, Signavio, for making this possible, and AIM for inviting me to share with everyone today. So I think this is a fascinating and, for me, exciting topic, so I hope it's going to be exciting for everybody else too. And that's, we're talking about, as the original stuff, change and digital transformation, or for me it's around business transformation, but digital appears to be that in buzzword. And it's fascinating for me to think about all of the different ways people are going about trying to enact change without doing some of the things that we've known for years will actually do some of that making the difference. So I just wanted to throw up sometimes that improvement's not enough. So sometimes the word transformation is juxtaposed, if you like, with improvement. Oh, well, we're doing operational excellence, we're doing improvement. That's the way that we're transforming. So I just wanted to pick a really couple of simple examples. Now let's imagine that we happen to manufacture diesel or petrol engines. Well, no amount of operational excellence improvement in making the engine cheaper or making it faster or making it economical is going to help us. For example, if you've read the news in France, where they're mandating that thou shalt not use such things in the future. So improving the engine isn't going to help me transform into making electric motors to drive my future cars. So we're not going to get there with improvement. We've got to think about a transformation. If we want to move from being an oil company, and this is something many years ago that I remember working out in the Middle East with an organization that said, hey, you don't understand that we're an oil company, oil keeps pouring, we're making money, we don't need to be anything more. I was with that same company pretty recently in one of the capitals, and they were explaining that no one is going to be an oil company, we've got to be an energy company, we've got to be doing solar, we've got to be doing wind. Well, again, the same thing goes. No amount of analyzing our processes for producing oil is going to help us produce solar or wind power. But having decided we're going to use solar or wind power, we can then look and say, well, what have we got that we've got a distribution channel that we could, right, so we could reuse the distribution. So I want to get us thinking as we go through the context of the mapping and the modeling, that to make real transformation, no amount of process improvement or automation is going to get you there from where you are now. And a slightly different example, because I know that we've got some people with us in the healthcare area. And if we think about it, with the use of the watches and health devices monitoring our steps and our heart rate and all those wonderful things, is it simply feeding that in, or is it transforming the healthcare business? Is it transforming the way that we calculate payments? Is it transforming the way that healthcare is being offered, the prices that we're being charged? Are there other people now saying, hey, I might be able to move into a market that I couldn't do before? So we need to look wider in order to start narrowing down into the areas that are really important to us. So changes like these require transformation efforts. So we're going to start to transform, and the problem is that we can't change what we can't see. So I mentioned the example of the distribution, and let's say with the distribution process, whether it be for the electric motors or whether it be well, actually, could we reuse our distribution process? Don't know why. Well, we actually don't have a view on that. So if we want to start changing something, we've got to be able to see it. Now, of course, that largely starts off with we've got to see the future before we start worrying about what we have now, because our current thinking is what's trapping us in our current world. And process is one of those key differentials. In another forum, I use the example of mobile phones, and I use the example of a BlackBerry versus iPhone versus one of the Galaxy phones. And if we look at it and said that what we do is the same, what's different is the how we do it. That's where the differential comes in. And by being better at how we do it and knowing what it is we want to do, then actually we can be the only product of those three left in the market. Now, when we're talking about those, and you guys know on the line, I'm sure that every time we go out and we say to someone, we want to do some stuff related to process, we usually get people coming and saying, I haven't got time for process mapping. We're too busy doing our corporate governance project. We're too busy worrying about our ISO, or we've got this data warehouse, or this ECM system to build, or we're building CRM, ERP, enterprise architecture. It doesn't matter which of them. But the funny thing is, in my view of the world at least, is that every one of them is a process project. Quality is about making sure that my processes are consistent. My CRM is going to be executing some processes. The data warehousing is process related, the ERP. Which then starts to say, so question is, how many times are we going to try and do these things by avoiding process? Now, we'll talk a little later because it's actually even more complicated than that. But the first starting point is if we want to do any of these initiatives or a transformation initiative or any IT transformation, business, then it starts by saying we have to know what's going on and what the processes are. And many of you on the line, I'm sure, will say, yeah, I know, but we absolutely get that. We've got technology and we're doing modeling, so it doesn't make a lot of sense. But let's step back and let me rhetorically ask some questions, and then you can start to ask yourself, are you really doing process modeling? Because what we find is there are a number of people using tools like Visio, PowerPoint, which are absolutely great tools. But if you're using those products, for the most part, in the main, what you're producing is a picture, which is great. Visual understanding, helping you to communicate. However, you chose to use green triangles and I've used blue squares. And yet we both meant the same thing. So there's no common representation. There can be a lot of maneuver and change for interpretation. And there's no sense of scale. That's just the nature of a picture. You know, I liken it to talking to your kids and saying, draw me a treasure map. And, you know, some will draw a pot of gold, some will draw a treasure chest. It's okay, but we need to know what it is. But they'll have some interesting meandering ideas as to how they drew the roadmap. And the only thing that we don't know is how far it is from the start to the end, because there was no sense of scale. You know, that there'll be gold. So we say, okay, we understand that, we get it. And that's why we've moved on, because we understand that, Mark. Well, that's why we do process mapping, because it gives us that clarity of scale. Typically, it's going to use a common representation. Now, whether it's flow charting, whether it's a Visio stencil, whether it's BPMN notation, doesn't really matter which one that you pick on, but it should be giving you a common representation to use around your business. However, maps can still be 2D thinking. So they're easier to understand and you can make some decisions, but can you ask a map, well, what if? And I'll give you an example of a what if. Let's suppose that you were referring to customer in a order to cash process that you mapped out in the tool of your choice. And so you've got capture customer order, ship fulfill customer order. That's great. And then someone comes along and says, look, we don't want to think of them as customers anymore. We want to think of them as partners. And so we're now going to change customer to partner. Someone said, well, that's great, but you know, we've got 200 of these maps, and we don't know in how many of them the word customer appears. We have no common dictionary from which we're driving those representations. Well, if someone says, well, yeah, but what if we made that happen faster? Or what's the true cost? Is that the journey through that process that we actually take? What are the variations? Well, let me understand the scenarios. Then we suddenly start to fall foul. And that's where we look and say, aha, that's where we're using a model. And it is that classic example, I'm sure many of you have heard it before, that says, well, who's got a road atlas in their car? You know, I don't know about you guys, but my kids don't know how to use a road atlas. Shame on them. And when they do, they get to the end of those page connectors and say, what, I've got to keep flipping back. But I can just put it into Google or Apple or my sat-nav, and it just tells me. It doesn't seem to know where one page ends and another one begins. And I can say, give me the fastest route, or the cheapest route, or the shortest route, or avoid those bridges. It just tells me, hey, it's all just connected. And the same is true for modeling versus mapping. We're linking all of those different maps that people have created historically in a seamless manner, linking multiple types and layers of information. You know, if you think one of the fascinating things I think about using things like Google Maps is whether I want to see the terrain, the topology view. Now, not many of you might, but I'm a lazy cyclist. I don't like hills. So anything that tells me that I can pick a route that's flat, because as yet, Google doesn't give me the ability to choose the flat route. Some of the other things do, but I can ask it those kind of questions. So it's a source of answers. It enables me to do testing and evaluation. And sometimes I joke, and it's a bit tough for vendors like Signavio being on a webinar like this, because I sometimes have to remind them that they're selling modeling tools to people that don't want modeling tools. They said, well, hang on a minute. I said, no. We have problems that we want to solve that a model is the correct vehicle to help us solve. Therefore, we may need a modeling tool to create the model to answer the question. We didn't want a model. We didn't want a modeling tool. We wanted an answer to the question, which comes into some of the other stuff around how do we justify the expense and look at it. So another way that I wanted to look at this, because many of you, I'm sure, given the audience and based on some of the other work that I've done with AIIM, will be doing process mapping, quite probably related to content management systems, document management systems, etc., etc. So I wanted to provide a different way of looking at that perspective of, well, we're already doing it, aren't we? So think about it. For many of the systems, and this is certainly true in BPMS type environments, that that my chosen automation vendor comes with process modeling, so I don't need anything else. And we get talking, and you find out, well, okay, what you're drawing is the procedure that you're going to execute in a single system. So I call it visual programming. You're not mapping the end-to-end process, looking at the manual steps, etc. You're focused on creating a visual representation that's going to be literally executed in a system. And the chances are you could then have tens or hundreds of these disconnected. So they're the same as the map that we talked about before, not clearly connected. So to illustrate how that's a little bit different in reality, that says, well, actually, in those procedures, often different tasks, decisions, or activities, whatever language you want to use, might be taking place in a completely different set of systems. I might be capturing the order in that first activity there in my ERP, but the decision as to whether I'm going to give credit to this client might be something that's based on information held in the ERP system. I might be using the BPMS system for scheduling, delivery, or shipping, etc. So actually, if I'm stuck with using the visual programming from one vendor, it doesn't help me when I'm actually trying to model across systems. So that's one thing to think about. A second way of thinking about it is saying, well, actually, that particular system that we've built in whatever automation platform is actually supporting a number of different procedures. Okay, so actually it wasn't a one-to-one system to map issue. There could be other procedures that are also occurring. Think about how you cover those. And as I mentioned, think about the fact that there are manual activities going on at that procedural level. Because once we come down to a procedure, it can be a manual procedure. There's no assumption that just because we've drawn it out visually that it has to be automated. There are many, many, many manual procedures that still also need to be interconnected with the systems because they're part of it. So think about maps if you're working them at that level. Another way I like to think about them is those are the physical models. So some people call them workflow as a language, but think of them as the physical models. So they're the physical representations of the work we're actually going to do. And a lot of people do a lot of those things in a lot of interesting ways. Some are good, some are less good. But hey, if they're serving the purpose and you're not missing a trick, carry on doing it. But then if we come up at another level and say, well, actually, now let's look at that logical level and say that actually one process might have a whole bunch of different procedures to enact different pieces of it. So when we get out from the weeds and elevating ourselves to the process thinking, then we're working at that logical level. And we can start to say, you know what, don't build the orange stuff because actually the blue stuff is more important to fit with our customer experience program or our top 3 things that the CEO wants to get done this year. And then at the next level, we say, well, you know what, that's still not high enough to decide if I want to transform, because if I want to do that transformation, I need to step up to a conceptual level. Now, here I use the example of a value chain. Customer journey map is another really good example here that enables me to come up and say, hey, you know what, they're busy fixing that, shall we say, that orange physical workflow at that low level, but hey, that's all to do with process B. But as we move from being engines to electric motors, process B is going to disappear. Hang on a minute, we should be investing our effort on process C. We're going to get a much better return in fixing the things that are going to have the biggest impact. So those conceptual views are far more communicative. They can help you make some pretty big decisions without going down into the weeds. An example that I worked with an organization in Europe that was a telecommunications company. The act of getting 6 people together for one day and actually just examining a process at that conceptual level, post-it type things on a board, they found that they could save £1 million. And I don't mean after they've executed a 6-month project. I mean while they were there on the day, they went, we could just stop doing that. And if we stop doing that, that's going to save us £1 million a year. So let's just stop. So keep coming up from a planning and communication point of view, and we're going to be able to target our resources in a better way. But not quite so simple, because this is where we need to think about that enterprise model, because when we're looking at the technology we may have been using at the workflow, it doesn't necessarily scale up and allow us to do the process. Sure, it can if we're visualizing, but does it allow us to connect those conceptual models to the process models or logical models to the physical models and actually be able to get that traceability, that accountability to show compliance where we need to show compliance and do cross-impact analysis? If we take an enterprise model perspective, we can ask all of those questions at all of those layers. And it doesn't have to take long and cost much, as long as we don't try and boil the ocean. So models, for me at least, are providing insight and clarity. They ensure we're all on the same page. They facilitate impact analysis. They improve our change efforts. They actually, rather than costing us money, they actually prevent wasted efforts and repeated changes. They enable us to eliminate waste before automation. I remember, I think it must have been 2003, 2004, speaking at an AIIM event in London, where at that time, one of the vendors, so you can imagine things have changed, so they won't be able to identify themselves, got up and said, guys, you've heard everything these guys have said about this analysis and design. Don't do it. Save your money. What you do is you automate what you've got now, then you can eliminate the people and worry about improving the process later. And because I'm, have been known to ask the odd tough question, I kind of asked the question and said, so let me get this right. We've built a system with fat that we don't need, so we're paying more for the system than we want, and we've got rid of the people that could have told us where we could save money. How does that help us as an organization? I can see how it helps me as a vendor, because it's going to guarantee that I've got a much higher revenue stream for a much longer period. So many of the automation vendors don't tend to want us to do too much of the analysis and design. A, it could slow down their sales, and B, we may not need as much of their products as they thought we did. And my last comment on this slide was that, hey, it's quicker and cheaper to fix a model than rewrite an underlying system that implements a model. And that's the thing about it, whether you expressly created it or not. The act of building that system, whatever it is, it doesn't matter whether it's in ERP, whether it's in BPMS or a rules engine, it doesn't matter. Every one of those systems, therefore, has a model. It's only a case of, is it expressly collected and documented, or is it just implicit, in which case we just hope it keeps working, and therefore difficult to change. So change is the key, and models are great, but so many people try and go off and do this thing on their own, and there's no need anymore. I mean, once upon a time, and those of you that have done any research or know me will know that I've operated in one way, shape, or form in the modeling space since 93, 94. And it would be true in those early days that it was about providing a powerful technical tool to a small group of all-pervasive, powerful analysts that held the keys to the kingdom. Well, we don't need that anymore. Technology's become easier to use, modeling's become easier to use, and we have new ways of collaborating, which means that we can leverage the wisdom of the crowd. But here's the tough part for those of you that are doing process analysis on the call, because the collaboration begins with us. All too often when I work in an organization, they'll tell me that, oh yeah, but the supply chain's doing this, the BPM team's doing that. They say, well, hang on a minute, they're all working on the same process. It is in your organization. And ask yourself the question, how many different tools are we using? And how many different versions of the truth are we creating around the same process? So the BPM team's created order to cash. Continuous improvement says, well, we only need half of it. Risk and compliance says, well, we've got to map the process to prove that we're compliant. Well, hang on a minute, there is only one process. Do we need it to be compliant? Yes. Do we want parts of it automated by BPM? Yes. Do we want the Six Sigma or continuous improvement teams to make sure that it's kept in an optimized fashion? Absolutely. But in the organization, we only want that. So when we talk about collaboration, ask ourselves the question, are we part of the problem or part of the solution? Because if we in the process community don't work together, then nobody else is going to, or at least not on the basis of listening to us and our advice. Strange things happen, though, if you do find the right way of collaborating. Because the right way of collaborating is really involving and empowering the workforce. So if we create that single source of process-related truth, we can share our goals, objectives, make them unified, visible. We can make sure that each group can access the information they need in ways that are appropriate to them. They can share the best practice, and they can reduce the costs for continuous improvement, risk and quality. We can actually reduce the cost of doing all those things. And as I say here, change is easier with everyone on board. So with one process, model, map, whichever language you want to use for a moment, but in that enterprise fashion, well, if we could ask the data entry clerk how best to improve his work, then maybe he can map the process out for himself. Maybe he can comment on the process and say, well, this isn't working, I suggest you do this. Well, if we then enact that change, the data entry clerk's not going to resist the change, because we have all experienced that resisting change is the real killer that we keep bumping into. And I resist change all of the time, just like many of you on the call. But when do I resist, and when are you likely to resist? It's when someone else comes along and tells us that they know better how to do something that we know how to do pretty well. However, if someone comes along and says to me, hey, Mark, you've done some pretty good webinars lately, but, if you were to try and do them a little better, what would you do differently? I said, well, maybe I'd do this and this. Well, why don't you try that the next time? I'm going to enact the change. But the probability is if someone says, well, I think that you should do your slides this way or you should talk that way, I'm probably not going to listen to them. So, well, hang on, I've done a few of these. They seem to have worked pretty well. But when they involve and empower me, now I've got the ownership. If I've got the ownership, then I'm going to change. And the same goes things for you. So if you look at the way and say, well, I'm already doing it at the moment, is everyone using it? Is everyone involved? Whether they be the builders of process, the managers of processes, the participants, are they all involved in creating the maps and models? Because there are ways of having them all do it that doesn't mean chaos. It also helps in terms of faster acquisitions, people, process, and systems. This is also a way in that joined up approach of saying, hey, you know what? Transformation is often not just about the processes, but the business models on which they depend. The story that I've told here is going to take some work. But how better do you know to create the connections between the executive strategy and the execution of that strategy? And by execution, I don't necessarily mean automation. Execution could be the fact that you change this or you do that in terms of manual working. I mean execution of the strategy, not execution of a process. Because in most large organizations, there are big disconnects. I don't know of a better way of closing that gap in a proactive fashion. And if you do these kind of things, you just might find that by looking at that conceptual and logical level, you identify easier ways of finding new revenue streams, improving your customer experience, reducing your costs, and less wasted effort. So for me, it's a no-brainer to find a better way of creating those enterprise models in a way that speeds up the delivery of your work. So thank you for that. Here on the call out, and I think Teresa's likely to follow through with you. The last book that Teresa was alluding to, People-Centric Process Management, really proud. This was an Amazon top 10 bestseller in its day when first released. Is that Signavio have actually licensed this to produce for the first time ever in electronic format, and is available to any and all of you. You simply need to visit the link that I'm showing there on the slide, and can get it with some other ideas. Now, the great thing about this book is it's not telling you how to do it, because Ian Gotts and I had the premise that it's not about telling people what to do. Sometimes it's just about helping them understand which questions should they ask in order to do their own self-discovery. So this book is very much focused on, well, what questions should I be asking when, if I want to be successful in a process management scenario, and particularly from the people aspects. So with that, that's enough of the theory from me. I'm going to hand over to Tom, who hopefully is going to give us some idea as to whether the theory and the reality do connect, or whether I really am off on another planet as opposed to other people just thinking I live on another planet. So with that, it's over to you, Tom.
Okay, thank you, Mark. That was really an enlightening viewpoint on process modeling versus process mapping, and really how it impacts organizations. What I want to bring to this discussion today is essentially some of the experience that's a range of our customers have had with process modeling in a common collaborative environment. So what we call enterprise process modeling. This idea that's starting to aggregate around some of the various practices and approaches that we take to what we were doing in Visio or in Lucid Charts or PowerPoint, and creating a broader viewpoint of what those process models look like. So what Signavio does is it enables this enterprise process modeling. And why are our customers using it? Largely, the bulk of them want to transform or optimize an existing business process. Right? And to bring to a point that Mark has already made, many of these customers are not looking to create a whole bunch of new technology. They're really looking at what the people, organizations, and trading partners, customers, and systems do to accomplish certain objectives. And so there may or may not be new technology involved. It may be reorganization, reuse of an existing system, repurposing standard procedures and techniques, but getting a better process out also can involve process optimization. Optimization would be looking at the details of how well that process is operating and identifying the bottlenecks and resources on it. Big point that many of our customers are coming to is implementing regulatory requirements. And what we see a lot of times in enterprise process modeling is people who are looking to transform or optimize that process have to look at the regulatory requirements and the risks that are associated with the process. Increasingly, when I talk to large corporate customers, they're not only working with processes, they also have to work with their risk and compliance office as to how they're managing regulatory requirements and increasing risk, including the risk of operating a certain process. A portion of it, of course, this enterprise process modeling is to provide IT automation support. And we do a lot of that, but it really comes at the end of an analysis of enterprise process modeling. The benefit, net benefit, and that many of our customers achieve is sharing documents across the organization in what we call our collaboration hub. Once that process model is published, we move it into an area that everyone can see. Not everyone in the organization is authoring the process, but everyone can see it. And so let's just talk about this transformation, right? In order to achieve a certain type of transformation, Mark has pointed out or identified the fact that we need to be aware of what those processes are. You can't transform what you can't see. And we know from experience in the 3 customers that I want to review today that we have a certain experience base that can help you achieve that digital or business transformation yourself. So let's just talk about a large tier 1 bank, a major U.S. financial corporation that is using Signavio's suite across their organization. Right. This slide touches on GRC, or compliance and decision modeling, which is a really radical improvement to how they were approaching compliance with things like Dodd-Frank or CTFC. But what started them in working with Signavio was their process modeling. What they came to understand was that drawing the process modeling in the OMG standard using business process modeling notation, BPMN, created a common definition of what the business analysts could use to describe to information technology and operations people who own the process, as to how that process would proceed. And the ability to publish that in the collaboration hub so everyone could see that and add the documentation to it caused a great amount of improvement in the way process change occurred at this bank and the way they were able to more rapidly achieve their objectives in terms of that transformation of that one process that the business analysts are working in. Right. The next step that came along was the idea of decision modeling for compliance. They realized that we have a very large set of requirements, particularly Dodd-Frank, SEC, many different areas that needed to have very close technical details mapped to the practice and the information that they're gathering so that they could be completely audited at any time and show that they are precisely following all of these requirements. They used the decision modeling tool within Signavio suite, right, to accomplish this successful implementation of many thousands of regulations. I know because personally I helped with a number of their implementations, right? So they were able to go to the Code of Federal Regulations, map the regulation itself to the line in the Code of Regulation, deploy and execute the code, and actually accomplish a very rapid turnover cycle in a matter of short period of time. So, all right. Let's go to the next example. PG&E is a major gas and electric utility in the northwest of the United States. They had implemented a new SAP maintenance system using handhelds to actually go out and take directives with the organization. They had a lot of issues with respect to how they actually needed to accomplish this maintenance of their facility and utilize the new SAP maintenance system. And what we were able to achieve in terms of implementing the Signavio suite was to create a common model of what that maintenance management system would look like and publish that to our collaboration hub so that the maintenance people, individuals, would be able to actually go in and utilize the information and documentation that was on the collaboration hub and the definition of the process, right, and be able to find how they would actually utilize the SAP system. So it became a common source of the truth for what to do next in their maintenance cycle, but also a common source for documentation and procedures and to give real feedback as to how to do the maintenance on the systems themselves. Let's talk about Tab Bank. Tab Bank is a small transportation-oriented bank that's in Ogden, Utah, right? And they had a basic objective that they wanted to grow, right? They were really focused on internal process excellence. And being a small bank, they used a lot of systems, systems that were packaged systems that they bought off the internet, packaged systems that were in their bank itself to accomplish all of their objectives, right? But they were facing a difficult time growing and achieving the objectives that they wanted to do. So they undertook an enterprise process modeling project, and that project itself was to really get a single source of truth for each of the important processes in their financial streams, in their loan origination, loan servicing for transportation assets, how they were servicing their customers. All of these became a central set of facts about what the process that they were working with and what the documentation that was associated with each one of those processes. And as a result, they really have put themselves on a path to growth. So really, those are just some 3 quick notes on how enterprise process modeling helped various customers of different sizes achieve objectives that were more than just documenting a process. They were able to do very complex compliance requirements. They were able to communicate with information technology and change agents for process owners to create new processes in their organization. And they were also able to communicate with field staff in the example of PG&E and provide documentation on how they needed to manage their infrastructure. So many different objectives can be achieved with enterprise process modeling. And with that, I would like to turn it over to AIIM.
Well, thank you. We've been listening to Tom Debibois of Signavio. Before that, we were listening to Mark McGregor. And for me, it's been fascinating listening to this discussion because a theme I was hearing through both of your talks, and even posted the comment in the group chat, that you're commenting that I'm seeing that finding that single source of truth. That's something that really resonated with me. I just had to say that out loud before we get into the Q&A here. And we do have a lot of questions that are coming in here, so I'll do my best to get to as many of these as we can in this next bit of time. So, Mark, let me start with this first question with you, because we talked a lot about the change management and the people side of this, of understanding, mapping versus modeling, and the importance of coming to that single source of truth. What is the next step? How do people go about beginning to learn how to model the BPM? Your thoughts on for this next step?
Yeah, I mean, that's a really good question, isn't it? And I think it's a great one because it also opens up the fact that people like me see there's a massive value just in the act of that modeling. And I know that sometimes that organizations struggle to see where that value is and how to go, and they're already trying to work out how I can build a system and automate. It's like, whoa, stop. Look at the whole big picture first. But I'm a little bit biased, and Teresa, I'm not sure whether you know, because I've actually worked with some of your colleagues. So actually, there's a pretty good AIM resource, and far be it from me to be selling on behalf of anybody else. But the AIM BPM program, which, hey, it's not all about me, and guys, I didn't write the course, so it's you're safer. However, I was involved with the guys as they were putting it together and doing some review, and I think that it's a nice vendor agnostic, if you like, guru agnostic way of getting solid information that you can use without being wedded to any technology, that will give you a really nice overview to how you can map in a better way and what you can do with those things and where those benefits come at each way. So I've got to say, you need to do some studying, and I happen to like the AIM course. So sorry, guys, I'm actually plugging you guys.
You actually stole one of my slides that I was going to mention coming up, so thank you for talking about that. And I've actually taken this course and I found it very valuable, and it actually reinforced a lot of what I learned in business school as well. So it was really good information in there. So thank you, Mark, for talking about that. Let me get to another question in here. If someone's asking about explaining how this type of approach with the process modeling and how that applies in the context of ECM and document management projects. Tom, can I start with you on that, and then Mark, feel free to join in.
Sure. In the context of document management, what we're seeing our customers do is they want to connect the documentation. First, let's talk about user documentation, which is critical, particularly with things like SAP systems or the example that we talked about, PG&E. The documents for standard procedures and repair and maintenance manuals are connected to our process maps themselves. You would have to see. This is a very popular feature of enterprise process modeling using Signavio, right? So in the context of document management, all of those have to be kept up to date and synchronized. So what we've done is essentially create a layer, a process-oriented layer atop of your document management system, where we're looking at the PDFs and documents and so forth in this area. So number two, we have, of course, compliance, right? Compliance is a very critical, of course, a very critical area that we're working with. We have a feature known as risk and controls, which is ISO 31000 compliant system for risk and controls. In that, you create the self-assessment of how you're managing risk or how you're complying with a particular aspect of the process. Again, we're creating content, filling out forms, PDF forms, and creating electronic records that need to be synchronized, again, back into the enterprise content management system. Do you have any thoughts about that, Mark?
Yeah, I knew that I was going to win the bet because I just knew that with this audience that one was going to come up. So I'm going to answer it in two ways. So the first one is going to be a little obtuse, and hopefully whoever asked the question will take it in the vein in which it's intended, which is, there we go again, focusing on the system when we should be stepping up and thinking about the process and what business we want to be in, rather than what technology we're going to use to execute it. So that's one way of looking at this. Is, hey, let's step up for it. Now the second one, at another level, goes back to the comment that I made that said, hey, content just doesn't sit there statically. That content that one's managing, either digitally or it's a moving content. You've got a process for creating it. You've got a process for archiving. You've got a process for approving it. Permissions for changing it. There's collaboration to see who else is involved. So if we think about those things, those are all processes or procedures and workflows that are going to occur. And let me ask you the question, is if you build those workflows without a model in whatever ECM document management system you choose, do you not fall foul of what I had in that early picture of saying, yeah, I've got lots of low-level visual programs, but if someone said, well, how does this one impact that one? The answer is, well, I don't know. How does a change on my create process impact my archive process? Don't really know. How does your archive process need to change if there are new regulations or a new compliance process or new decisions being made? I don't know. So that's where the two things fit together. They're not replacements, although there can be a close correlation, because one of the things that those of you that are coming from that background can do is bring to the party that says, well, actually, just like Mark was showing those manual procedures, well, that could be a Word document. So you need to be connecting your tasks or activities in those process models to my concept management system for storing that, and I can provide you with better versioning, etc., rather than just saying, oh, you connect to some file structure, in which case it's a weakness of the tool. So the two things can be played together in a number of different ways, but the main one is to keep stepping back and saying, are we trying to use the wrong solution or a good solution to solve the wrong problem, and let's keep thinking about the problems and then the technology second.
And then we're trying with Signavio to present that document in the context of the process in a manner that your user community can easily go in and not only look at like a static document that's hanging in a file somewhere, but it's also connected to some phase of a process that they're participating in.
And someone's actually asking a way to say this slightly differently. They're asking, is it safe to say that modeling is the business process as relational is to databases? Would that be a true
Actually, that's a great way of looking at it, because it's one of my passions that in process, particularly since the advent of BPMN, that people seem to be trying to pack the conceptual model, the logical model, and the physical model into one single visual representation that nobody can understand because it doesn't serve their purpose. Whereas in data modeling, and I'll stick with the analogy that the person's kind of given us, and said, hey, any CEO can sketch a data model. He says, well, I've got customers, and they've got a relationship with orders, and that has got a relationship with cash. Now, he doesn't know whether it's one-to-one, one-to-many, or any of those things. He doesn't know about primary and foreign keys. So he sketches it, and it's perfectly fine to communicate. We then give it to a data model who says, well, I can take that, and I'm going to make that a thing that says, well, actually, this is a one-to-one, one-to-many relationship. That's great. We then give it to our DBA who says, well, I can't implement that. Everyone knows that's not the most efficient way of implementing SQL. I'm going to add some secondary indexes here and some primary keys there, and that means it's going to run faster on SQL. And he creates the physical representation. Now, we then move that across, if you like, from our North American office to our South American office, and say, well, that's great, but you know what? We don't use SQL Server here. We run on Infomix. And that's not the way to optimize for Infomix. So what I can do is I can go back to that logical model, and now I'll create a new physical model with different primary and secondary keys, because this is the way to optimize for Infomix. So it's less that modeling is to business process what relational is to database, and more a case of saying, actually, modeling is the way of creating the because business process fundamentally are how we're doing the work. So if you like, the modeling is the same as data modeling, and yes, you could relate the business process to being the equivalent of the database, e.g. where the work's actually occurring or where the information is being worked on, and the models are the way in which we can express the best way to implement it and the higher level of abstraction for different people to actually get the views that they need. I hope that helps, and I hope that that kind of person, because I can actually see that one in the Q&A, can actually give us a response if we haven't answered it for them, and we'll get back to them offline because I see the time's ticking.
If I might, sometimes we see people not creating a process modeling, they're documenting a scenario. So part of our training and working and understanding process modeling in that context is to explain the difference. A scenario would be, in a relational model, would be one physical example of a form, that's been normalized in the structure. And so the model holds the structure. The scenario is just one use case of going through their process.
Okay. I have time to take one more quick question in here because we are getting to the end of our webinar hour, and someone is asking about the recommendations for organizational cultural change management steps. Before I turn the question over, I do want to mention that AIIM has recently launched a new quick study course on change management. 2 different ways to find that on the AIIM website. So if you do go to AIIM.org, go into the search box and just type in change management, and it'll be in that list there. And it's also on the main AIM website under the Education navigation item, and there's a link there to all of our quick studies, and that's one of the options in there for you to go ahead and check that out. Mark, any other resources on change management, since you were speaking a lot about that? Anything else that you can offer or suggest?
Yeah, so often when it comes to the difficulties of transformation and people say, well, what should we do about change management? And we say, yes, that's what you should do. Change management. So on a more serious note, I think that, okay, so, I mean, for me, okay, in the context of the question, I am looking at the question in our system, so we're talking about change management in the context of getting divergent offices on board. So the first thing is I've got divergent groups of people. Gee, I need to find a way of having them stop thinking about their problem and talking about something else where I can get them talking together that say, well, if we could agree on that, what else could we agree on? And there's a whole load of exercises that I choose to use, if you like, that are based on the neurolinguistic programming approaches of coaching and the such like. So that's just me and the way that I would do it. You know, I mean, the stuff that many on the line would say, hey, you know, the John Cotter steps of change is still really good in terms of providing that grounding. Beyond that, I think it's unfortunately one of those things that says, to a large extent, it's pick your religion and hope, because I mean there are so many books on this topic now, and you know I've got some pretty fixed views as to how I would do it if I was doing it. And hey, I'm happy to take this question offline with you if you reach out to me and share. But that's not saying that hey, my way is right or any better than the next way. It's just saying that based on the learnings that I've had and the projects that I've worked on, I've found some particular techniques have been really, really useful. But that doesn't mean that they're better or worse than somebody else's. So I think that, I guess my advice would be study as widely as you reasonably can. Don't get trapped in any of the dogma, and then work out how you can create your own change toolbox, taking a little bit from here and a little bit from there in ways that feel comfortable to you and enable you to be true to yourself.
We really are running out of time here, so I just want to mention a couple of things. AIM's Chief Evangelist John Mancini has recently offered a new AIM road in information management, and you can download this free ebook at aim.org/IIM, so I suggest you do that. As we mentioned earlier, AIM offers a variety of different training resources, so that's at aim.org/training. That link is also in the resources list for you, and by mentioning that resources list, I have a couple of excellent pieces that Signavio has often offered. They have a resources page on their website that's excellent, and the link to that is in the resources list. So avail yourself to all of the different things that are in that resources list. Just click on those. It's going to open a new browser tab for you. You can check that out later. We are recording this webinar. It is going to be available in the next day or two. And so feel free to come back, listen to this again, invite your colleagues to listen to this, because this has been a fabulous discussion, and very much welcome the speakers who have been with us today. And also a reminder, the survey is going to open at the end of the webinar. I value your feedback. Appreciate if you take a few minutes to offer that to us. Very much want to thank our underwriter, Signavio. Without the support from our solution providers, AIM wouldn't be able to provide you with these free educational programs like this webinar series. So Signavio, thank you for sponsoring the webinar. And as we do bring our webinar to a close, I just want to leave everyone with our speakers' closing thoughts or key takeaways. So first, let me start with Tom Debivoise from Signavio. Your closing thoughts today.
I believe that we're entering a new era that really is accomplishing this enterprise process modeling in a collaborative environment. And so that I think that my takeaway thought is that everyone here should consider learning a little bit about business process modeling notation and decision modeling notation. It's going to be an important skill in addition to the collaboration for your organization's objectives. Mark?
Thanks, Tom. And Mark McGregor, sure. Your closing thoughts.
Yeah, I think my quick comment would be, and far be it from me to plug the sponsor, but as you can imagine, when I was asked to do this, I go to the website, I do a bit of digging around, have a little look and see what people are up to. Two things struck me, well, three things struck me, but one, hey, that collaboration hub of sharing is I'm not going to say it's unique because there are some other, but the way they do it is pretty unique. The other thing that I love that these guys haven't plugged is they've got something called Quick Model, and I love this idea I haven't got to learn how to model. I can just type in, oh, it's this, then, and the damn thing seems to build the model for me. I haven't seen that anywhere else, and I've got to say that, maybe that is the sort of thing that enables me to do things in a quicker, faster way than the old ways of doing it that may mean that, hey, maybe tools are now more accessible to me in ways they weren't before.
Yeah, Mark, thanks for that plug. There is a free trial available. I'll just leave it at that for 30 days.
And actually, if you go to Signavio's website, you can see all that information. So, again, thank you, everyone, for your time today. Thank you, Mark and Tom. Thank you, Signavio. For AIM, this is Teresa Restick, and we'll see you on our next webinar, and have a great day.